So as much as possible, we want to take advantage of WordPress's built-in post types, but sometimes they're not the best thing for the job, or we don't need all the extra features or bloat WordPress includes with the post types. Enter custom database tables. So custom database tables are a great way to store highly custom data sets. In this lesson, we're going to cover how to create a custom database table for our plugin. So to do that, let's go to our code editor and let's navigate to the actions section of our code. Hit return a couple times, and here we're going to create a new function. So following our naming convention, it's going to be 5.1. We're going to provide a hint for this function. So this function installs custom plugins, plugin database tables. Okay, so the function is going to be called SSP create plugin tables. Okay, and then we're going to call a global variable. This is a variable that it currently exists in WordPress outside of our function. We're going to pull it into our function. We do that by calling global and then WPDB. Now WPDB is a WordPress class. WordPress defines this class WPDB. It contains a set of functions used to interact with a database. Its primary purpose is to provide an interface with the WordPress database, but it can be used to communicate with any other appropriate databases. You can read more about the WPDB class over here on this page. Okay, so back to our code here. Now that we've pulled in that, what we want to do is we want to try to run some code. Before we do that, we're going to set up a return variable. Okay, so this is just a variable we created called return value, and we're going to set it to a Boolean value, and we're going to set it to false by default. Then we're going to try running some PHP code. We're going to use a PHP try statement. This lets us try some code. If it doesn't run, it'll throw an exception, and so that it'll catch that exception, and then we can do something if an error occurs. So this would be like a PHP error if this happens, and then we try to run some code in here. Okay, so if our code runs successfully, then it won't throw an error. But if it does, if there is an error in our code, it'll throw an error here, and then we can handle it how we want. So now what we're going to do is we're going to write a query, and we're going to query the database to create a new table. So I'm going to paste a bunch of code in here, and then I'll review it. All right, so the first thing is we're going to get the appropriate char set for our database. Now this is you might be running a different type of database depending on what kind of server you're on. So WPDB will tell us what kind of char set that database is set up as currently by calling this function. So we're going to store that in a variable called charsetCollate. Okay, so the next what we're going to do is we're going to put together our SQL statement. This is going to be the create table SQL required to add a new table to our database. So here what we're doing is we're just writing some, this is pretty much typical SQL. So we're going to call create table, and then we're going to give it the name of our new table. So this is a neat little bit of code right here where we're actually including the result of a variable that's stored inside WPDB. And that's the prefix of our WordPress's database tables. When you set up WordPress by default, the prefix is going to be WP underscore, but there's an option while installing WordPress to set that up to something custom, and you can find that inside your wp-config PHP file, what that prefix is set up as. This is just going to output the unique prefix that you have set up on your WordPress install. Then the next thing here, this SSP underscore survey underscore responses, that's going to be the name of our new table that we're going to create. Inside here, we're going to set up the different columns for that table. So the first column is going to be ID. It's going to be a medium integer with no more than 11 characters, unsigned, not null. It's going to auto increment. So this is going to be our ID column. When you create a record in this database table, it'll automatically increment this ID from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5 to 6, 7, 8, kind of thing like that. Next column we're going to set up is called IP address, and it's going to be a varchar, and it's going to store the value of the user's IP when they submit a response to one of our surveys. After that, we're going to have a survey ID. It's going to be a medium integer. Then a response ID, also going to be a medium integer. This is going to be the value that they choose from the radio select option in our survey. So there's going to be a survey question, and then there's going to be 5 inputs: strongly agree, somewhat agree, neutral, disagree, strongly disagree. Those are going to be the 5 radio button options they're going to have. And so they're going to correspond to their own value 1 through 5. And that's going to be the response ID that we're going to store here. Next is the created at column. This is going to be a timestamp. We're going to default it to 1970-0101. But we're going to actually update that timestamp to the time when that record is created later on. Then the updated at column is the next column, another timestamp. This one we're going to set to the current timestamp. So when this record is created, it'll set it to the current time, and then on update, it'll automatically update this column for us. The reason why we don't do this on created at is that some versions of MySQL don't allow you to have more than one column calling this current timestamp function. So that's why that's like that. Then we set up the primary key for our database table. We're setting it to the ID column. And then we set up a unique index called IX, and it's going to be the combined value of the IP address and the server ID. And then we close that up, and then we pass in the charset collate value that we got up here. And we close that with a semicolon, and that is our string for our SQL. Now what we need to do is we need to include WordPress's functions for updating the database using their built-in function called db delta. So we call this library by calling require once. ABS path will give us the absolute path to our WordPress install. And then this is where that library is stored in. It's inside wp-admin/include/upgrade.php. After we include that, now we can call this new function db delta. So db delta, let's look at that. The db delta function examines the current table structure. It compares it to the desired table structure and either adds or modifies the table as necessary. So it can be very handy for updates. You can see some examples of db delta in use actually in your own WordPress install. So in WordPress here, in the WP admin folder, there's a file called upgrade schema. Let's find that here. Upgrade schema. Well, it should be here. Maybe it's just upgrade now. They renamed it. There should be examples of using db delta in that file there. Cool. You can read more about db delta on this page here on WordPress. This is on the WordPress codex here in the creating tables with plugins section. All right, so we call db delta, and what this is going to do is it's going to create this table. The cool thing about db delta is if somebody already has this table in their database, instead of throwing an error, it'll actually compare their table with our code and see if there's any new columns that need to be added and update the database. So it's really cool. We don't have to write 2 database queries, one for creating, one for updating. db delta will handle that automatically for us. So if this all runs successfully, then we set our return variable to be true. And at the bottom of our function here, what we want to do is return the result of this. So we'll do that here. This is going to return the result. So we'll look at handling PHP errors in another lesson. But for now, this function should run. If there is an error, it just won't do anything. That's what this will do. It'll return false. So that is our create plugin tables function. Okay, so now we're going to create another function, and the purpose of this function is to call this function and any other functions that we want to run on activation. So we can add that right below here. It's going to be 5.2. This function runs functions for plugin activation, just like I said. It's going to be called SSP activate plugin. And in here, right now, we only have one function to call, and it's going to be our create plugin tables. So again, we know with functions, they don't run unless they're called. So we have to call this function, and we're going to do that by adding another hook in our hook section. So navigate to the hook section of your code here, hit return a couple times underneath 1.1, and we're going to add in a new hook. So this hook 1.2 is going to be for plugin activation, and we're calling a new WordPress function called register activation hook. So register activation hook. This is a function that registers a plugin function to be run when the plugin is activated. It's pretty basic. It takes in two parameters, file and function. So for the file, we're going to give it the path to where the function is that it's going to run. So in that case, it's in the file that we're currently in. So we can just call this handy variable here, file, that'll return the file that we're currently in. And then the function that we're going to run is the new function that we just created, SSP activate plugin. You can read more about this hook, register activation hook, on this page here on the WordPress Codex. All right, so don't forget to update your table of contents. So let's go to our table of contents here. Let's add in our new hook that we just added. And let's also add in the new actions that we created. So we created two action functions. Awesome. So make sure you save your plugin now. Now save this file, and let's go to our WordPress backend here and navigate to plugins. So again, we created a activation hook, and that hook isn't going to run unless our plugin is activated. Our plugin is already activated, so we missed our opportunity. So let's deactivate our plugin now and reactivate it. Just deactivate and then click activate again. That should run that new function now. So to see if our database tables have been set up correctly, I'm running MAMP here. So I'm going to open up MAMP, which is running a local server, a PHP server. So here I can click on Open Start Page, navigate to Tools, and go to PHPMyAdmin. These are all the databases that I have set up locally. So here's my database table for this particular website that I'm working on. And there we go. There's this new table created, WP_SSP_survey_responses. It automatically got created for me. So we can see that that was successful. Awesome. So we've just created a custom database table. So in the next lecture, we're going to look at coding our plugins core features, and eventually we'll be adding survey response data to this table. Stay tuned.